Hello and welcome again to Sport Unlocked, the podcast digesting the week's sports news with analysis and interviews. Coming up, we're going to be joined by the Crystal Palace and Premier League Doctors Chief, Dr. Zafar Iqbal, to talk about Ramadan observance by players. We're also going to analyse the latest from the world of UEFA, new financial regulations. There's also a new transgender sports controversy in the UK, and there's a new amnesty report into worker welfare abuses in Qatar. Well, that is where we recorded last week's pod back from Doha, alongside me, Rob Harris, from the Associated Press, as ever, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, and Martyn Ziegler from the Times. Welcome back, guys.
Yeah, great to be with you. Good trip to Qatar. Lots of news there, and back. And the news agenda keeps rolling here too.
Yeah, and we had the UEFA Executive Committee meeting. UEFA also meeting with Common Ball in London on Monday, but the week is ending with a new focus on one of the big UEFA calls in recent years over the financial fair play investigations into Manchester City and how it relates to this. Well, that's one of the adverts produced by Etisalat to mark their sponsorship with Manchester City, but it's those sponsorships that remain in question. And new details from Der Spiegel, the German outlet, about how Manchester City raised its sponsorship revenue from Abu Dhabi, linked to its ownership. It's a new report, one that has really irritated Manchester City fans who do believe there's some sort of agenda against them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to perhaps move away from the UEFA angle because there is a Premier League investigation into Manchester City. It's going on for more than 3 years now. And Der Spiegel, the German magazine website, it's actually produced some documents as well as a story, which make absolutely fascinating reading. It's not just about manipulating sponsorship money, allegedly. It's also about appears to have breached rules on signing youth players, paying secret payments, which we have talked about before, to its former manager Roberto Mancini, secret payments to the agent of Yaya Toure. I mean, it's a whole host of things, and no wonder the pressure now is going to increase on the Premier League to speed up and complete their investigation, because this is back in the public eye, and I think it's pretty serious.
Yeah, absolutely, Martyn. I mean, that laundry list of accusations, it took a while to get through those. And, Man City might feel like they're under attack. It's always them. But that's what the documents appeared to show. It is them at this point. And you've gone through a number of potentially serious breaches. The thing is, Manchester City have never addressed any of these items individually. There's rather this kind of broad response that this is part of a campaign against the club, and the emails and the documents are taken out of context. But as you said, they touch on so many different aspects of the football regulatory framework. You talked about young players, you've talked about payments and salaries, and then you've talked about sponsorship deals. They can't all be taken out of context, can they?
And let's roll back, because there was that CAS ruling in 2020 where Manchester City did get the Champions League ban overturned. But in part, that was because the CAS arbitrators found that the allegations were time barred. They happened too long ago, according to the UEFA rules. But crucially also, Manchester City were fined €10 million for disregarding the rules around cooperating with investigations. They were found to have obstructed the UEFA investigation. This was not a completely clean conduct by Manchester City in that regard.
Yeah, can I ask Martyn a question? We've written this before, and you wrote it in the story this week as well, related to the Premier League case. Rob mentioned this €10 million fine for not cooperating, and we've said that this case with the Premier League is into its third year. The judge at the High Court in London talked about how long this is taking as well, presumably because Man City's lawyers wrapped the Premier League up in sort of legal disputes.
Yeah, I mean, the Court of Appeal last year, that was one of the things that Manchester City had that they'd sort of legally challenged the Premier League's call for them to release various documents and information, and they'd sort of launched a legal challenge against that. They lost that challenge. I think that's fairly critical. So obviously they've had to supply a lot of information. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Der Spiegel had been approached by the Premier League. They seemed to know what the three main areas the Premier League investigation was focused on. We have to say neither the Premier League nor Manchester City would comment. But it's I think if you're a Manchester City fan and you're very defensive about this, all I would say is yes, there are other things wrong with other clubs. Paris Saint-Germain have sort of ridden fast and loose with the FFP rules. The big clubs like Manchester United have, they've doctored the UEFA financial distribution rules to give them a sort of a bigger share of the money. But that doesn't make it all right. If Manchester City have also been breaching rules and they've been found out about it, that doesn't make it all right. And I just don't understand why there's this sort of furious sort of. I mean, I know football is very tribal, but I think you need to do what's right.
Rob, Martyn, doesn't it focus the attention, I guess, on the on these governing bodies? How much more evidence? You mentioned the other cases. There was one with Liverpool and a youth player as well, and I think they got sanctioned. Martyn, you've written about that in the past, and Chelsea as well with youth players and a case at FIFA that ended up with a sanction. What's happening here shows that 3 years is a really long time, and UEFA ultimately had its case overruled. Is this about governance as well? Are these ruling bodies able to penalise City? It shows that they can't, right?
And how willing are they? How many of the other Premier League clubs you would think they actually do want City to face action? And ultimately, if you've got 14 clubs backing something, they do control the Premier League. And yet this case has dragged on, while ultimately there could be questions over how Manchester City funded these title wins, 5 title wins in the last decade.
I mean, I think the Premier League clubs do want action because I think quite a number of them wrote to the Premier League demanding that they investigate, which is why that is the only reason the Premier League only investigate if there's a complaint from another club. So, for example, when a couple of years ago I did the story about Liverpool employees hacking into Manchester City's scouting database, and Liverpool paid a £1 million compensation for that. The Premier League never investigated because nobody complained about it, it's one of that's one of the sort of slightly strange things about why the Premier League shouldn't mark its own homework. Absolutely.
Well, is this one for that Tracy Crouch committee, the
regulator,
the one that some people don't want?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, whatever that should be. Yeah. Whether that's a beefed up football association acting as the proper governing body or an independent body. Yeah, absolutely, it should be.
Just on this is a bit unfortunate timing as well for Man City. They had this huge announcement in the morning when a few hours before Spiegel's report was released, saying they're planning a series of events to mark the 10th anniversary of that first title win. It's going to be called 93-20 to commemorate the moment when Sergio Aguero scored that last-minute goal. I guess those fans who are sort of screaming agenda, they say, well, hang on, the day we announced this thing, this happens. But again, that title, if you go through this list of alleged abuses, you could argue that some of it is, I dare say, a little bit tainted if the rules haven't been followed.
And all the emails are showing various sort of interconnected payments from Abu Dhabi companies with money feeding into the Abu Dhabi Investment and Development Group, which ultimately was seemingly paying for this sponsorship. On the heart of it, we're seeing that actually Manchester City's own parent company looked like it was funding the supposed sponsorships, which help to inflate the revenue to comply with the regulations. And Manchester City have never said anything in detail about these emails, the conversations we see in the exchanges. Previously, we'd only had partial exchanges. Now, Der Spiegel have released more substantial ones. And they've never issued any sort of strong denial, as I remember it. They've talked about emails being out of context and hacked and stolen.
No, they've never addressed anything specifically. That's been the approach the whole way through. I think something which illustrates it very well, which Spiegel released in Roberto Mancini's contracts. So he had a £1.45 million basic salary with Manchester City, and then another contract with Al Jazeera club in Abu Dhabi, 1.75 million a year, and that deal was for 4 days coaching a year. That's all he had to commit to. That was signed by Simon Pearce. He witnessed it. He's a City board member and also an advisor to the government in Abu Dhabi. And interestingly, what happened was they would pay Mancini's company, an Italian-based company, and instead of invoicing Al Jazeera Club, his company would invoice Manchester City, who then sent the money to Al Jazeera, who paid Mancini. So it was, these sort of circular routes of money between Manchester City and Abu Dhabi and the Abu Dhabi United group. It's just it's. To me, you can't say bang to rights because obviously I'm not the judge and jury, but absolutely a serious case to answer.
Yeah, and you mentioned Simon Pearce there as well. He's in a bit of an awkward spot as well potentially because he provided this evidence to CAS saying none of this is from central funds of Abu Dhabi, and these documents now kind of suggest the opposite. I don't know what that means, but you got one guy saying that, someone very senior saying that, and his names are on these emails. And by the way, who owns Al Jazeera Sports Club?
Sheikh Mansour.
Money that.
Der Spiegel have actually published the entire contract that Mancini had with Manchester City and this club in the UAE. It's fascinating to go through a contract. In fact, the most striking thing for me was written into it. He was guaranteed a certain number of flights to Abu Dhabi, only business class, not first. Doesn't have a good negotiator.
I think only you'd have spotted that, Rob, because clearly you travel in high echelons.
Well, I think anyone witnessing my return from Qatar could dispute that. But, we've still never actually had any sense of just what consultancy work he even did for the club, Mancini. And we have played it before, but this is what happened when myself and Tariq caught up with him in March 2020 at a UEFA event to ask him about those payments.
I don't know nothing.
Did you read when your salary was in there?
I don't remember.
Because it said you were being paid more from Abu Dhabi than you were from Manchester.
I don't know.
Roberto Mancini there, back in March of 2020, not wanting to discuss it at all.
Well, neither did the current coach, Rob, because I believe you tried to ask Pep Guardiola if he had similar arrangements, and that led to this.
Roberto Mancini was discovered to have had separate payments from Abu Dhabi while he was manager. Have you ever had separate payments from Abu Dhabi while City manager?
Do you know the question as you're asking to me? Do you know the question asking me if I receive money for another situation right now today? Honestly, do you think I deserve to make this kind of question and happen, Roberto? I don't know. The day when the travel about I've received money for other situations.
Okay, we're running an embargo now, please, for 1 day. Just down the front, please.
Are you accusing me? Are you accusing me to receive money for under?
No, I'd asked the question some time ago.
That's
but
good.
I mean, it's only relevant because it came up again this week. That's why.
That was in 2019 at the midst of all the UEFA investigations, and I've never heard anything from Manchester City to challenge it, to deny it, or anything, which would be interesting if they did actually respond to it.
Yeah, can I just repeat what Martyn said earlier? This is just journalists following a story. This is an incredible story. No one has an agenda against Manchester City or its supporters or the people that work there. It's just this this drip, or now a deluge of documents just has emerged over a number of years, suggesting, potential rule breaches, and this is our job. It's an interesting story. One of the most interesting in recent years, wouldn't you say?
It is, and that's why we follow the trail of it. I mean, it'd be far easier for us. We know people involved at Manchester City. An easier life would be not to have to ask difficult questions, to get into these awkward conversations, challenging them, demanding answers, and to, quite frankly, avoid the abuse we're getting on social media. But I would think we're doing it because you can't ignore it. These are legitimate concerns being raised also across football.
Yeah, I'd say again, I think for people who just want to sort of send abuse, just try and step away from the tribal element of this. And it's not just about Manchester City. I mean, if it was, whatever it was, we would focus on it the same way.
So the Manchester City news was dropped by Der Spiegel just as UEFA was holding its press conference after UEFA Executive Committee meeting that was all about the new financial rules, the replacement for financial fair play. Did you get a sense they really knew about this? They didn't want to talk about it, did they?
Well, the audio didn't work on the press conference for those of us on Zoom, so maybe someone had got wind of it. But that press conference wrapped up really quickly, but then there was a briefing by Andrea Traverso, the UEFA project leader for these new financial regulations, and we did ask him that whatever the new regulations are, should there be any skullduggery behind the scenes, can UEFA be relied upon to actually root any of this out to find it? And to be honest, his answer was quite telling. He said, sort of, no, we're not the police. So if you do something as complex and as so far away from the sort of balance sheet of the football club, it doesn't, to me at least, appear that UEFA has the means, and some would say the will, to sort of go after some of this.
Well, no, because the only reason it has done is because there was, Rui Pinto, the Portuguese computer hacker, who managed to sort of get all this information. So if that hadn't come out, UEFA probably would have been none the wiser. But
I do think we get a sense sometimes that UEFA don't like those tough battles with the clubs, and trying to ban your own obviously can be pretty difficult. Although they still technically do have that plan to resume the action against the Super League clubs, Barcelona, Real Madrid and Juventus, who are still pursuing that breakaway. And actually, as we look at these new financial rules, they seem to be the big winners to me, the Super League rebels. Absolutely nothing has changed from the last year. The changes coming to this Champions League were in part shaped by Andrea Agnelli before he went off and launched the Super League. Now we've got these new financial rules which free up spending. They can start to spend more again. We've got the new squad cost controls that were announced by UEFA this week. So they just have to cap their spending on football matters like transfers and agent fees, on players, on coaches, to 70% of the revenue, and it's been phased in over 3 years.
I don't think 70% is going to be easy for a club like Chelsea, for example. Do you think that's going to be easy?
I don't know if it's going to be easy. However, if you've got the most revenue, you're likely to have the best players again. This was my kind of sense, and we may have touched on it in a previous episode or not. I don't understand why they've only gone for financial regulations and not sporting regulations at the same time. And UEFA actually made a point of this, saying, we're not trying to get competitive balance. And now if you're a fan of a team that isn't one of these rich giants from the biggest markets, that's just going to be deeply depressing, because this was an opportunity to maybe regulate the game in a way where, yes, you do bring these new financial regulations in, but then what about potential sporting changes, like, I don't know, limiting the number of transfers a team could do, something on squad sizes, and just to kind of ensure there's greater competitiveness, because people have been saying over recently this is getting a bit boring, the same teams all of the time, and they haven't really addressed that, and they said they didn't really want to this time.
And they are allowing greater losses as well. Currently, it's 30 million euros over 3 years. That will double to 60 million euros of losses allowed, or actually an additional 10 million euros allowable losses, basically, if it can be covered by the ownership.
Yeah, so that makes it easier for somebody to come in and put money into a club, doesn't it? Which has been one of the criticisms of FFP, that it didn't allow that. So, not that seemed to prevent Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain very much, but anyway. It depends. I think it depends what you want from football. Do you want an American style, NFL style system where you have a sort of draft and it's all very, very balanced and stuff like that, or do you want more of a sort of what football has been like basically since it became professional 100 years ago? And I'm not sure the answer is to have everything really everybody on equal, because I think that has its own challenges, and also I'm not sure it would work.
No, I think, but there's not maybe that two extreme ends that everyone needs to be equal. I guess it's to increase the level of competitiveness, because the risk is, for example, in England, we've never had teams scoring this many points, and then if you then extrapolate that into other competitions as well, the level of dominance, you worry about rendering the sport, I don't know, quite boring, I suppose, because if there's no jeopardy, I don't know why you want to watch it.
And this is one of the issues with the new group stage from 2024, the so-called Swiss model, with an expansion from 32 to 36 teams and an increase from 6 to 10 games per team as they're placed in this single standings. And 8 teams automatically go through to the round of 16, but then teams 9 to 24 go into a playoff round. So even if you finish 24th out of 36 in the group stage, you've still got a chance of making it into the knockout round, which even provides a safety net for one of the elite teams to struggle, or if, I don't know, they've got a load of injuries, they can prioritize, say, their domestic league and still know they can have an escape route into the more lucrative knockout rounds.
Yeah, speaking of escape routes, Martyn, they didn't announce it this week, but these two coefficient places, after the whole Super League, sticking it the eye of the big boys, that felt like an opportunity to perhaps redraw some of this, but those coefficient places are still there, it seems.
They sort of scrapped the leapfrogging element of it, but yes, you can still finish 5th or win your national cup, and if you've got the highest 2 coefficients, you can go through. UEFA, they sort of kicked the final decision down the road a bit, haven't they? So I think it's probably going to be next month, but it does seem that that's the way it's going, despite Schäferin saying in only last month that actually there were going to be more places for the smaller and mid-ranking countries. So I'm not quite sure how that squares.
And that's where it seems he's not used the leverage he had over the Super League clubs after the ill-fated, aborted attempt to launch that breakaway in April 2021, to actually stand up perhaps for the smaller middle rank clubs as well, because he could easily have not distributed those places to the historic performance positions. So it could have helped a team like Roma get into the Champions League this season, Arsenal perhaps in previous years, if it existed. That can make a huge difference of tens and tens of millions of euros. I mean, even just a jump from the winning the Europa League into a mediocre season in the Champions League can double the revenue almost you get from UEFA.
Do you know what the rationale is? Like, why do they want to reward failure of the big boys? What is that? What's because you've already got a bunch of teams in that competition. It's up to 36. There's going to be a load of really big teams in there. What's the need to get 2 of these a safety net? Go on, Martyn.
I think the driving force is UEFA have got this new format. They're a little bit worried about it. Speaking to the broadcasters, and the broadcasters, and they say, "Look, we've done this, and not only are we doing this, but we can guarantee Manchester United will be there even if they finish 5th, for example." So I think it's a sort of a sell to the broadcasters, and they want to make a lot of money out of it, and that's why I think there's sort of internal pressure from the people, who do the numbers, who work in UEFA or team marketing, the marketing company, and the European Club Association, all together. They're saying we need this for the new competition, and I think that's why the politicians are sort of looks like they're going to be forced to backtrack.
It'd be a great season for Manchester United if they managed to finish 5th, wouldn't it?
I mean, it looks like UEFA have prioritised harmony rather than sort of going to war with all the teams. So actually, this is a means of actually sort of placating some of those elite clubs that are still in control at the ECA.
Yeah. Does it also, Alexander Seferin's interesting as well. He, as you said, Rob, he came in as a champion of middle-sized and small nations and clubs, and I think he genuinely does believe it. But I think saying something and doing it, he's found that transition the hardest, because he's not actually managed to do any of those things to the extent that the words would suggest. Obviously, he's added this Europa Conference competition and more places in the Europa League, and that gives smaller nations a chance to compete in Europe, but not the actual, not with the force that his words had suggested in his speeches, perhaps.
And Sheffrin's also been busy this week in London after his early exit from Doha, where he didn't go to the World Cup draw, which raised some eyebrows. He was in London in Mayfair with Alejandro Dominguez, the CONMEBOL president, to open a joint UEFA CONMEBOL office, which seems like their attempt to sort of challenge the authority and power of FIFA with this sort of rival power base at the heart of London. Well, it's time to turn to this week's guest on Sport Unlocked, Dr. Zafar Iqbal. He's the head of sports medicine at Crystal Palace. He's also chairman of the Premier League Doctors Group. Well, it's been a good week for you at Crystal Palace with a victory at Arsenal, and you have highlighted how a couple of players, Cheek Kouyaté and Jordan Ayew, have been observing Ramadan. So they were fasting in the build-up to that game against Arsenal. So what are the medical challenges for players observing Ramadan?
Unfortunately, for that particular game, the two players, they'd been fasting all day, but they were able to open their fast at sunset, which was at 7:41 that day. So they were able to open their fast just before the game. So the main problems that we face certainly with the guys and footballers who are fasting during Ramadan. So the four main areas. One is as a result of hydration, because we know the importance of being well hydrated, especially while trying to train and play football. Sleep and recovery. So that's obviously a major issue as well, because of the fact that Muslims fast between when early morning dawn and sunset, so in the hours of daylight. So what can end up happening is that their sleep can be disturbed because they have to wake up early to try and have some food before they then close the fast. And so sleep and recovery, we have to work with the players on that. And then other issues are certainly with regards to nutrition. So we know the importance of nutrition for performance, helping muscle regeneration and healing, and also in recovery. So what we do is work with the athletes in terms of hydration. We try and make sure that in the times that they're able to drink, that they're drinking regularly throughout the night, that they're also taking on isotonic fluids ideally, so they get electrolytes as well. Avoid anything which is going to cause dehydration, so avoiding caffeine and tea, and then making sure that when they're eating overnight, that they're eating the right kinds of foods as well, so that they're not gaining any additional excess fat or weight. So they'll have foods like foods which are slow release carbohydrates, so foods such as kale, sweet potato, brown pasta, those and porridge. So as a result of that, the carbohydrates release the energy slowly during the day.
How much of this is educating the coach and the managers around Ramadan, and how has that changed in recent times?
So it has quite a bit, to be fair, over the last few years. At all the clubs that I've worked at over the last 15 years, thankfully we've been able to have good cooperation with the managers, with those players that have been fasting. Over the last couple of years, we've also organised a couple of conferences. So last year we organised the FA Medical Society, and we had some athletes there, such as Sonny Bill Williams, Moeen Ali, Azhar Ali, also Freddie Canute, who've all fasted and continue to train and perform. And we also got some specialists, so Prof. Karimi from out in Qatar, who's one of the leading authorities on fasting and performance. And so we got a lot of the doctors and physios who are working in football that attended that. So it was a case of educating those. And then there are lots of different groups that are also educating coaches. Now, almost every Premier League club has got some Muslim players there. Some fast, for games as well. So what used to happen previously was, having spoken to some athletes, that some of them would hide the fact that they were fasting because they felt that maybe they wouldn't be selected, or that the coach may think that they're not able to perform. But now we're finding that more and more coaches and the surrounding staff are aware that they may have players that are fasting, and then able to help support them. So there's a lot more awareness, there's a lot more education, and as I say, it's good to see. Even last year, it was fantastic to see where the game against ourselves versus Leicester, where we were playing a game, and we spoke with the referee just before. We had Muslim players on both sides, and we spoke with the referee to see if we could actually have a pause in the game. And it was Graham Scott, and he said he didn't have an issue. We spoke with the managers, they were fine about it. And when there was a natural pause in the play where the ball had gone off, referee signalled that both the players went off, quickly opened their fast and came back on again. We didn't actually tell anyone about it, that it was going to happen. Nobody even noticed. It was only when Wesley tweeted about it after the game that people were then made aware of it.
Is that going to happen? Obviously we're in the clock is moving as far as fasting times are concerned. So as the month progresses, there will be games, midweek games in particular, where they're going to have to open their fast during the game potentially. So is that what we're going to see now throughout the rest of the season, or until Ramadan ends?
That's right. So the evening games, those games that are in the evening. So the Premier League, I spoke with Mike Riley, and the Premier League have said that the option is there if there are players that feel that they need a break and wish to open their fast, and if the referee is okay with it, then they will give that option of having a break in play just very quickly. And the way that I see it is no dissimilar to when the weather is too hot and they'll have additional drinks breaks. So it literally is for 30 seconds or a minute. The players can go off at an appropriate time and just have a quick bite to eat and a drink.
If I've checked the times right, the entire FA Cup semi-final, Palace against Chelsea, will be played before sunset on that
That's
day.
Right. That's right. So, as I said, in those sort of games, different players have different ideas or opinions on that, in terms of some will fast, some won't, and what they will do is they'll make the fast up later. It's a little bit easier if it's an evening game, because then they can quickly open their fast, or even if it's during the game, they can open their fast and get some, and get hydrated. Whereas otherwise, if it's a 2 or 3 o'clock kickoff, then the game will be finished 2 hours later, and then it's a long time before they can actually rehydrate. As I said, some players have done that. Other players have found that too difficult.
Has there been an impact on performance?
That's the $1 million question. My science brain suggests that it would. We know that if you are dehydrated, so if you lose even 2% your body weight in fluid, that can decrease your performance by up to 20%. But if you speak to the players, what they find is that mentally it helps them. So the fact that they're able to fast, So mentally, they feel that they feel stronger. So this is something that Colo Torre, when I was at Liverpool, really emphasised. And we all know the importance of mental well-being and being motivated. When you're playing a game. So if you're not motivated to play, then that can have a negative performance. So they actually felt mentally stronger, and so as a result of that, they felt that they could overcome any negative effects of being dehydrated or lack of food.
Just to get a sense, how does it balance out in terms of during Ramadan, whether it's footballers or anyone being able to sort of continue their job and actually almost be able to take that judgment into their own hands in terms of if eating or indeed drinking is essential to their job, or it would hinder their job, or it'd be detrimental to their health? How does that sort of fit with how people are in terms of religious exemptions, or where you can take it into your own mind?
Yeah, so there are certain exemptions. If there is going to be something which is going to be detrimental to their health, so anybody who's unwell clearly doesn't have to fast. So that's one exemption. The very young, the very old, they don't have to fast. And then the other aspect is if you're also traveling. So I think it's something like 47 kilometers. So if you're traveling to another city and it's more than 47 kilometers, that also gives you the exemption with regards to fasting as well. So what you will find if it's an away game, then players will use that exemption not to fast and make it up later.
And also, you're talking earlier about the different diet. It's not the normal dates and nuts, maybe, for iftar that they might have with their family members at home. They need to sort of resist that.
Sure. So what will happen is that, again, we work closely with the sports scientists and the nutritionists, and we'll try and provide the best food for them. So for opening their fast, we'll give them a smoothie of banana, honey, and dates. So the advantage of that, it gives them that quick release carbohydrate that they need to continue to perform.
Well, it's been great having you on again, and at a time of such positivity around the club, a season of transition. Patrick Vieira in there, top half of the table into an FA Cup semi-final. Must be a good atmosphere around the club for you, particularly when you're working with the players. You've got them at close hand so often as well.
Yeah, no, it is. But also, as I said, the manager's fantastic, and he's experienced lots in his, and he's certainly bringing that to the club. But more importantly, as he also says, and as we say, it's trying to keep it level. So when things aren't working out right, it's not getting too down. Similarly, when things are working out right, it's not getting too excited, because things can change very quickly. So it's trying to make the right decisions most of the time and not really be influenced by the outside noise.
And as we bring it back to where we started, the observance of Ramadan, do you get a sense that there is a sign of increased sort of tolerance and respect of religion by the way actually football and footballers, in terms of respecting Ramadan and fasting, are being treated by teammates now?
I never hid the fact that I was fasting, and obviously not being a professional athlete, it was much easier for myself. But other players would be asking, players who weren't fasting would be asking. But now, as I said, there certainly is more awareness, and I think it can only be positive because of the fact that we know, all teams have players from different religions, different faiths, and if you're going to get them to all work together, then the best way of doing that is understanding what each player is about. Because if you can understand them and they also appreciate that, then you're going to get far more outcome and output from them.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Zafar Iqbal, thanks for joining us on Sport Unlocked again.
Thanks again. Thank you for having me.
Great to be joined by Dr. Zafar Iqbal. Well, we were in Qatar last week, and perhaps it's a sign of how things are heating up as we build up to kick off in Doha on November the 21st, that there's yet another amnesty report highlighting the abuses suffered by workers. And significantly, I think this time is just days after they were hosting the world, presenting this image of football greatness, the World Cup organisers did have to admit in a statement that workers have suffered. They have been violated. The talk of some security guards working excess hours and others not receiving pay. This amnesty report really is pretty damning, and a reminder of the challenges in Qatar regulating every company and every worker who's there.
Yeah, the very worrying thing about this amnesty report is the fact that you can have all these sort of grand announcements about changing the regulations and the laws and stuff, but in practice, Amnesty went to look at these people working in the security, and and the practices were terrible. People working for years without a day off in extreme heat. Nothing apparently had changed for these people, and they're working for big firms on World Cup projects. So it's just it's not just good enough just to change the law. It has to be implemented, and it looks like it hasn't been in very many cases. And I think that's a big issue for the Qatar government and the organisers.
Yeah, guys, the other thing, there was only a snapshot of company. I think it was a very small sample as well, and all of that detail came out of it. And that, if you extrapolate that, becomes even more worrying. And the details as well were striking. Payment based on whether you're from Kenya or Tunisia, and your race and nationality. That was quite shocking for doing the same work. And the other thing that comes screaming out of it is this power imbalance between employees from desperately poor countries in very precarious circumstances and their wealthy employers. So you get a sense that even if you are being abused, you're not going to raise your hand because things could get even worse for you than the working conditions you've just described.
And it is one of the things we hear a lot, that the Qatar organisers and FIFA talk about people acting in a discriminatory way when they criticise the World Cup. But this report does quite clearly highlight the sense of workers about how they feel discriminated against. The worker from Kenya talking about being paid by nationality, earning less than a worker from the Philippines, and a Tunisian as well. And points out in Amnesty's report that Qatar has no specific law prohibiting racial discrimination.
The other thing I thought was shocking was that the workers could be fined like 5 days' pay for, what seemed to be a sort of a very minor sort of, breach of the rules, and then they're fined 5 days' pay. What employee can fine you pay? I mean, it's just awful.
And that Supreme Committee statement did talk about 3 companies being found to be non-compliant across areas at FIFA events, the Club World Cup and the Arab Cup that were held in Qatar in 2021. These aren't events that are sort of not directly associated with the World Cup. They aren't a hotel project. It's not a shop being built. These are workers actually on FIFA's own projects. And they do say these violations were completely unacceptable, and they do say it has led to changes and measures being put in place, such as contractors being put on a watch list or a blacklist to avoid them working on future projects. They also talk about 391 contractors being reported to the Ministry of Labour, 50 contractors being blocked from deploying on Supreme Committee projects, 56 contractors demobilised the Supreme Committee.
Do they name them, Rob? Do they name these people?
And
are we just relying on these numbers?
And we hear about them in response to amnesty. So it was one of the things as well highlighted while we were in Qatar, that they talked about Gareth Southgate needing to educate himself better. For the average journalist turning up in Qatar last week, they received no sort of sense from particularly the government, a guide to how they've even changed or how the country has changed. So while they might complain about being misrepresented, they actually do nothing to actually try and tell their story or even state their case. Maybe perhaps because it could lead to more difficult questions back.
Well, from my point of view, I find it hard to meet anyone at all. I tried to meet, I put in requests to meet officials, and they were not made available.
Well, moving away from the world of football, some boxing news.
Yeah, there's a sort of new international boxing federation after all the problems it's had with the AIBA, the old one. It's now called the IBA. It's got a Russian president, and his name is Umar Kremlev. And there's a very interesting board meeting this week in which he was asked to resign. He was then asked to break off all the association to break off all connections with Gazprom, which is majority state owned by the Russian government, which has paid off all the debts and is basically underwriting the association. And he refused to do so, said we'll go bust if not. And he's also said in the board meeting he was issued with a UK visa in March after the invasion of Ukraine, and he's planning to come to the Commonwealth Games, which is, I think it's going to be a difficult one for the British government to answer for that. The response of the British government is that they will have to make clear that anyone coming to the UK will have to make clear they are not supporters of or funded by the Putin regime. So that might be tricky.
Well, the British government has also this week added another sports-related official to its sanctions list, Alexander Zhukov, who sits on the UEFA Executive Committee, now sanctioned. He's the CEO of Gazprom Neft, the renamed firm that was once owned by Roman Abramovich, 2 decades ago. British government, you'd think, might be preoccupied with this ongoing Russian war on Ukraine and oil prices, the cost of living, but we've had an intervention from Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, this week on transgender athletes. Take a listen.
I don't think that biological males should be competing in female sporting events, and maybe that's a controversial thing to say, but it just seems to me to be sensible. And I also happen to think that women should have spaces which are, whether it's in hospitals or prisons or change rooms or wherever, which are dedicated to women. That's as far as my thinking has developed on this issue. Now, if that puts me in conflict with, some others, then we got to work it all out. That doesn't mean that I'm not immensely sympathetic to people who want to change gender, to transition. And it's vital that we give people the maximum possible love and support in making those decisions. But these are complex issues, and I don't think they can be solved with, one swift, easy piece of legislation. They've taken it takes a lot of thought to get this right.
I just find it really hard to understand how this is a priority for the British Prime Minister right now. You've cost of living crisis, energy crisis in the UK, as you mentioned, a war in Ukraine. How is this? To me, it feels like an attempt to shift attention away from other issues. This is, for me, a sports issue, whether not one for the British Prime Minister, certainly not right now.
And we did have British Cycling announcing that transgender riders won't be able to compete at the moment. They've suspended their policy all over the controversy over Emily Bridges competing. She was not able to compete in a British event because it counted for international ranking points and the UCI wouldn't let her compete.
Yeah, I think the British Cycling realised that their policy, which would have allowed her to compete for national ranking points, was therefore unfair, and they've suspended its policy, which I think is probably the right thing to do. So, we've debated the whole transgender sport and whether women should be a protected category for biological females long on this, and I think it looks like British Cycling have caught up the hard way with this, and they've been caught in a bit of a storm. But I think it's also something which other sports governing bodies are going to look up very carefully, and this is going to be an interesting one to follow for all sports. But go back to Boris Johnson. He came out and made this statement, and yet the government said almost immediately that they're not going to bring in any policies themselves. He was just uttering his personal opinion. So,
well, Martyn, isn't that in keeping with general policy with this government? Like, they'll take both sides and they win heads or tails. It seems another one of those occasions where they're rowing on to both sides, and they'll end up winning one way or the other potentially.
Well, yeah, and if you want to listen back to more in-depth discussions on the challenges around rules and regulations for transgender athletes competing, there's an episode from last June, one from March as well, and we'll post the links within the description for this episode. But that about brings an end to this week on Sport Unlocked. From me, Rob Harris, from Tariq, Panja, Martyn, Ziegler. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for your input, guys.
Yeah, great to catch up. Speak soon.
Thanks, guys.
And whatever your sport you're watching in the days ahead, hope it's enjoyable. And you can message us at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.